Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account, Chapter 18, An Elf, a Man, and a Dwarf. Third Age, 2956, 55 years ago. Angry was not the proper word to describe the expression on Thranduil's face. Enraged did not even come close to revealing the emotion in the Elven King's aura. Livid was not enough to tell how furious the Cinder was feeling. The Elven King was a caged, man-eating tiger as he paced, proud, in front of his daughter, back and forth across her line of vision. His robes billowed about him as he moved, and his glow, usually kept under wraps and dimmed, blazed and rippled with fury. His blue eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight, the emotion within them chilling Baraneth to the bone. He was the very image of an elf lord, in all his glory, omnipotent, beautiful, larger than life, and absolutely cold. Baraneth's father looked so powerful and otherworldly in his anger, that if she did not know any better, the princess would swear that one of the Valar had come to Middle-earth to place judgment upon her. Back and forth the Elven King stalked in his study, none around to witness the princess's punishment. The advisors in Elrond had been cast out of, more likely fled, the room the moment Elladan had reported what had transpired between Nazgûl and the warriors. Baraneth was sure that her father's rage would be enough to terrify Sauron if the Dark Lord came upon the Elven King now. Thranduil halted in his pacing, back to her. Even though he was not facing her, the golden-haired Eleth knew her father was glaring at the wall. Still, the Sindar did not speak. Baraneth also remained quiet, afraid to break the silence between them. She just wanted her father to talk, to say something so they could get this lecture over with. But the Elven King did not utter a word, and would not look at her. The silence stretched on, and Baraneth dare not break it. Finally, Thranduil spoke. Princess Baraneth of the royal family of Mirkwood, your arrogance astounds me. His voice was calm, far too calm and cold, and the Eleth knew that the dam had not yet broken. She swallowed reflexively and broke her silence. Adar. With that single word, the dam holding the Elven King's rage shattered. He spun to face her, blazing and powerful. What were you thinking? The Sindar shouted. I raised you to be a proper royal and an honorable warrior, and yet you do this? You act like an orc and insult and provoke a guest. When her father compared her to an orc, Baraneth's own temper flared. A guest? Eskel is a freak. Thranduil's mouth moved wordlessly before his entire presence seemed to darken. A freak, you say? How so? His voice was scathing, cold, and snarling, but the princess responded anyway. He doesn't glow. He can hide in plain sight. He can speak to the shadow trees. He has abilities that are unnatural and dark, she snapped. He is an assassin and a dangerous. Funny, the Elven King interrupted in an icy, low voice that did not belay humor at all. Your argument sounds just like Aglar's, but he did not antagonize and offend a person we welcomed into our home. He glared at her, daring her to speak. You have only made yourself lower in my eyes with your words. You try to hide behind prejudice, using it as an excuse. But I know that is not the main reason you wanted to spar with Eskel. You wanted to flaunt your skills and abilities in front of your warriors. You wanted to prove that you were better than some freakish wood elf. His voice shook with fury, and his hands clenched at his sides, the nails biting into his palms. You and so many of the warriors only see Nazgûl as a weapon and an outsider, not to be trusted, not to be kind to, only to be used to show that you are better than him. After all, you are proud warriors of Mirkwood, and he is only a homeless assassin. The Elven King's voice dripped sarcasm and wrath like a crack in a volcano dripped lava. Thranduil looked straight into her eyes, face changing into an apathetic mask, and he spoke in a tone that held no inflection. You disgust me. Not only have you thrown away all sense of duty and honor, but you were childishly rude and insensitive to the elf that has been aiding in our fight against the shadow and saved my life. If Nazgûl wasn't a freak, if he did not have the skills and connections that he did, if he did not care enough about this world to come out of the shadows to save me, I would be dead. I would have died long ago. I've spoken with Glorfindel. He told me how much Nazgûl feared revealing himself to the elves. At first, he feared rejection because of his lack of glow. Then he feared people acting like prejudiced fools, and that they would try to use or contain him. Congratulations, Baroneth. You proved him right. Have you bothered to think about what Nazgûl has done for us? You have seen the reports of dead orcs and spiders over the years. You know he drove out the large spider colony that had been taking our warriors. He is the hidden guardian. He protected us from the shadows and aided us without being asked. He saved Lord Elrohir, and, according to Lord Glorfindel, helped to solidify the alliance between the dwarves and elves. And so you thanked Nazgûl for all he has done by bullying him, antagonizing him, and acting like an arrogant brat. Thranduil spat. He looked into her eyes, and his blue orbs closed. And you don't even care. You don't care how much you have hurt him. You would never insult or be cruel to a fellow warrior in such a way. But because Nazgûl does not glow, because he is dangerous, because he is secretive, because he is a better fighter than you are. Despite herself, Baroneth flinched. You felt the need to show your dominance and superiority. You have brought shame upon yourself, the warriors, and this family. The final sentence was a growl, not a shout, but it might as well have been. Baroneth inwardly cringed at her father's tone. I'm sorry, the princess said stiffly. His blue eyes were stern and hard. No, you are not. You are not sorry that you harassed and bullied a guest. You are sorry that you got caught and were humiliated. He straightened, and he was no longer the angry parent, but the livid, cold Elven King. He was unsympathetic, aloof, and hard. They were no longer father and daughter, but king and shamed captain. Due to your level of immaturity and aggression, I hereby strip you of your title of captain and forbid you from joining in patrols for the next 20 summers. Thranduil gave her punishment in a flat, apathetic voice, but his eyes still burned like flaring blue torches. Baroneth gaped in shock. Adar, you cannot be serious. Thranduil's expression was cold. I am serious, my daughter. You have become arrogant and violent, and I do not like it. You need a break from war and fighting, and need to learn humility. No patrols, no orc or spider hunts. You may train if you wish, but if I hear that you have broken my trust and rebelled against me, I will punish you as severely as any of my warriors. The demoted princess resisted the urge to gulp nervously. She knew as well as anyone what happened to warriors who disobeyed the Elven King. The punishment ranged from the absolute stripping of their warrior title to imprisonment for a number of years. That was, unless their disobedience was treasonous. Treason meant exile from every elven realm, like what had happened with Amalug. Swallowing her pride and anger, Baraneth bowed low and spoke in a bitter voice. "Yes, my lord." "You are dismissed," the Elven King said flatly. The princess spun on her heel and left, angry more than upset. Thranduil watched his daughter go and sighed, reaching up and rubbing his temples. He knew that Baraneth had a fiery spirit, but her arrogance could not be tolerated. The confrontation with Esgol had not been the first time the Eleth had acted like this. The Elven King did not know what to do. Baraneth could not see how aloof she was acting. Thranduil had been informed about the shadows in some elves, and feared that his daughter was becoming afflicted with such a condition. He did not know which scenario he feared more, the one where she was indeed poisoned in her soul by darkness, or that her anger, antagonism, and arrogance were her own. Either way, he intended to keep the princess in the still light part of Mirkwood, away from the shadow's touch, until he could figure out a way to make her see that her actions were wrong. A rapid knock on the door made the Elven King look up. Tolui was standing in the doorway, worry etched on his features. Alarmed, Thranduil rose to his feet. "What is wrong?" "My lord," the advisor said in a rush, "the dwarves from Erebor are here. They were attacked on the way here by spiders." "Are they all right?" Thranduil asked, very glad that Elrond was in Mirkwood. "Yes," Tolui responded, still looking frazzled. "But one of their number was separated from them in the skirmish. They found the spiders' bodies, but there was no sign of him. They think he wandered off and got lost in the woods." The Elven King's visage darkened. Everyone knew how dangerous Mirkwood was, even in the day. He strode out the door towards the throne room with his friend at his side. "We'll send out patrols immediately to find him. Which one is missing?" "The youngest one in their group. He is only about 10 years younger than Fili, but he has never been to this realm before," Tolui responded. "His name is Gimli." Gimli, son of Gloin, was your average type of dwarf. Neither too tall nor too short, not too fat or too thin. He had auburn hair and a proud beard of the same shade of reddish-brown. He was a warrior, whose chosen weapon was the axe, and held a wide expanse of knowledge on caves, mines, gems, and other things to do with stone and craftsmanship. About half an hour ago, he and his dwarf party had arrived in Mirkwood. The group had included Kili, Fili, Balin, 4 negotiators, and, of course, Gimli. Gimli was the youngest in the party, though not by much, and he was long past his majority. However, he had never encountered or dealt with the elves before, and his father and King Thorin had agreed that it was far past time that Gimli learned a little bit about their immortal allies and their culture. His father was still slightly hesitant about sending his son to the place where he had been imprisoned years ago, but the stubborn dwarf had put his trust in Kili and Fili to keep Gimli out of trouble, blatantly disregarding the fact that the auburn-haired dwarf was usually the one to pull the mischievous brothers out of danger. While older and able to act mature at times, the royal brothers still had a knack for mischief a mile wide. So Gimli had joined the diplomatic party merely to observe and learn about elven culture, something which he was not too thrilled about. He would rather be in the caves and halls of the Lonely Mountain than amidst the trees with flighty elves. Not all of Gloin's wariness of elves had faded, the mysterious elf Esgol, who Gimli had never met, being the noteworthy exception, and some of his habits and thoughts had been passed down to his son. A half hour ago, All the party could do was hope that Gimli did not say or do anything that made Thranduil throw them in prison again. Worrying about being polite to the elves in elven dungeons was now the least of the auburn-haired dwarf's problems. One irritating situation and bad stroke of luck had been swiftly followed by another after the party had entered the forest. First of all, Gimli was on his way to meet elves. The dwarf was not sure how he felt about elves. Gloin's stories and the whispered warnings he heard around Erebor being the most prominent things in his mind. He had a feeling that many of the elves would be aloof or act superior because of his race or age. If so, this trip was not going to be enjoyable at all. And so, as the group had gone deeper into the woods, Gimli's melancholy had increased. Gimli's second issue had been that he was in a forest. The auburn-haired dwarf was perfectly all right with most forests, though he preferred caves. But Mirkwood was plain old creepy. He was not one to pay attention to trees, but there was a definite wrongness to the living woods around him, a heaviness and gloom that had nothing to do with the lack of light beneath the boughs. Of course, while they were walking under the dark trees, Killy and Philly had informed him, quite serious for once, that the trees around the dwarves could actually kill them if they wished. That did not make Gimli feel any better about the woods. "Don't worry, Gimli," Killy had told the younger dwarf. "Luckily for all who travel in this realm, Esgil is able to keep the trees from trying to kill us for their own amusement. Be glad that they only try to make us afraid." Gimli had spent the next few minutes mulling this over. He did not know much about the mysterious assassin elf that the dwarves who had taken part in the quest to reclaim Erebor had befriended, and had never met him. It was not like Gloin would or could invite Esgil over for dinner. From the bits and pieces that Gimli had gathered, the elf was violet-eyed, an assassin, a great warrior and fighter, did not glow, was known to be shy and wary around strangers, and had saved the line of Durin in the Battle of the Five Armies. He knew that his father tolerated, and even liked the elf, which told Gimli that Esgil could not be too prissy. Maybe he would be able to tolerate one elf on this trip, if the assassin was even in Mirkwood at all. When Gimli had mentioned seeking out the assassin, Killy had laughed and said, "One does not find him, he finds you." Not long after that, the group had run into an ambush set by spiders. The following skirmish with the monsters had resulted with Gimli being separated from the others, losing his way in the shadowy forest. So, of course, to just make his bad and irritating day worse, Gimli had to run into what had to be the largest group of orcs in the realm. He had managed to take down 7 of them before he was captured and tied to their other prisoner, a human with dark hair. And so here Gimli, son of Gloin, was, captured by orcs and tied to an unconscious man, gloring at the monsters around him and angry that they had taken all of his axes. He could see his weapons piled with the man's sword and dagger, black orc blood still covering all of the blades. Apparently, the man had fought too before being captured. Once he awoke, they would have to come up with a plan to escape. Gimli was a confident dwarf and a great warrior, but even he admitted that he would not win against 50 orcs. The orc captain, an ugly brute with a jagged scar across his forehead, strutted over to the 2 prisoners. He grabbed the man's hair and pulled his head up, scoffing when the human did not react. He said something in the harsh black speech before drawing his hand back and slapping the man across the face. The human woke with a gasp, and Gimli could turn just enough in his bonds to see the man's silver eyes slip open, widening before narrowing with loathing as he spotted his captor. "It's about time you woke up," the orc sneered at him in gravelly Westron. The man did not speak. Gimli too kept his silence, though he shifted and moved, eyes scanning the area around them. "I don't like games, so let's just get to the point," the orc growled. "Where is the hidden one?" The dwarf blinked in confusion, but he felt the human stiffen the tiniest bit behind him. "The what?" Gimli asked, getting the orcs to focus on him rather than the man. "Where's the one who can hide from our master's sight?" the monster snarled. Gimli had no idea what he was talking about, but again the man shifted slightly, so the human was aware of whom they were speaking of. "Who is your master?" the man asked instead. The orc slapped him. "I'm the one asking the questions. You were with the elves before you went into the woods, human. I know you know who the hidden one is." "I don't know what you were talking about," the man protested, obvious confusion in his voice. But Gimli could feel the man's heart pounding, and knew that was a lie. "You lie," the orc captain snarled. He unsheathed his sword, leveling it at Gimli's face. The dwarf leaned back slightly, nose only an inch from the blade. "You will respond truthfully, or I'll start carving up the stunted one," the monster threatened. "Who and where is the hidden one?" "Don't tell them anything, laddie," Gimli warned. He did not know what was going on, but he knew that the orcs did not want the location of this hidden one for platonic reasons. Besides, once they got the information they needed, the dwarf and man would be killed. The orc bared his yellowed teeth in the auburn-haired dwarf's face, but his eyes were on the man. "Last chance. Where's the hidden one?" "Right here," a musical, lilting voice said from behind the captain. Gimli blinked, and suddenly the orc's head was detached from his body. Black blood sprang over the dwarf's face. The body fell, revealing a cloaked elf. His hood was down, revealing pale blonde hair and pointed ears. But that was not the feature Gimli spotted first. The elf's eyes were violet. Recognition was instantaneous, and despite the fact that he had just been saved by an elf and was still tied up, the dwarf smiled. "One does not find him, he finds you." And that was how Gimli, the only son and child of Gloin, met Esgil. Legolas raced through the treetops, Glorfindel swiftly falling behind as the assassin almost flew through the familiar route in the trees. He could sense Estelle, the dwarf, and the orcs ahead. There was a relatively small group with the prisoners, but a much larger group headed towards them. The other orcs were far away, however, and the violet-eyed elf knew that he could reach Estelle before they arrived. Worry and annoyance rippled through the elf's body, his gut tightening and his expression twisting in irritation. How did the orcs get so deep into Mirkwood without anyone noticing? Surely the patrols Thranduil sent out would have run into them. Legolas grimaced. The orcs were a large force, and any patrol that did find them would have been slaughtered. With that in mind, the elf hoped no one had run into the orcs, or if they had, they'd remained hidden and gone to warn the Elven King and gain reinforcements. The assassin came upon the scene as the orc captain threatened the dwarf prisoner. Legolas's eyes flicked over Aragorn, searching for injuries and finding none other than a bump on his head, before he studied the dwarf. He recognized him, though they had never officially met. He was Gimli, Gloin's son. The elf had spotted the dwarf a few times when he visited Erebor, but had never approached him. Gimli had always been with many other dwarves, and it was not in the assassin's nature to go out and say hello to people when there were many others with them. The elven warrior's reactions to him was a perfect example as to why he was cautious. "Last chance," the orc captain snarled, sword held threateningly close to Gimli. "Where is the hidden one?" Legolas could see Aragorn's indecision from his perch in the tree. He too could guess who the orc was referring to. Him. Hidden one. Hidden guardian. It was not that hard to figure out. Why the orcs thought the man knew, the elf had no idea. But now was not the time for musing. Without a second thought, the assassin dropped into the orc camp, right behind the captain. "Right here," he stated, and cut off the monster's head. The body fell, revealing Gimli's shocked expression. Recognition flickered in the dwarf's eyes, and he grinned. Then one of the orcs screamed, "Get him!" They came at the elf, a force that would normally make a single fighter flee. But the assassin only let a blank mask cover his features. The orcs ignored the man and dwarf, focusing on the threat in their midst. He was the hidden one, the one they had been sent to kill. He was their target. Legolas turned his knives outward, lifting and straightening his arms in a single swift movement, and stabbing the two orcs at his sides. He turned, slashing across the throat of another orc as he spun, ducking a strike and circling around the orc, his knife sinking into the creature's back. His arms swung inwards, both blades cutting deeply into an orc's chest, shifting his hold, and brought the blade down and back into the stomach of the orc trying to sneak up behind him. The assassin kicked another orc in the chest so hard its sternum shattered. He stabbed the downed orc before lifting it off the ground and throwing it into its allies. In a nanosecond, he sheathed his daggers, letting throwing knives fall into his palms and throwing them at the fallen orcs. Each knife hit its mark. His elven daggers were unsheathed as another orc swung at his neck. He dropped to the ground, spinning with his leg kicking out, making another two orcs fall to the ground in a heap. Two quick downward strikes ended them, and Legolas rose to his feet once more. The assassin sensed the orc behind him, 30 yards away, and moved, leaning out of the way of the arrow the archer had sent at him. He turned and unsheathed his bow, shooting once. The orc, unlike the elf, did not have honed reflexes, and took the arrow in the forehead. He hit another of the monsters in the gut with his sturdy bow, a pained gasp escaping from the creature. Quick as a blink, he stabbed an arrow into the orc's eye, pulling it out and shooting it at the other archer. The long-distance threats neutralized, Legolas brought out his knives once more. Steps light and quick, he danced out of the path of the orc's swinging sword, twisting and slashing across the back of the beast's neck. Two orcs ran at him from both sides, yelling, and he watched them come. They swung at him, and he merely stepped back, the two impaling each other on their blades. "Oi!" a gruff voice yelped. The call did not distract him, and without even looking, he threw his knife at the orc threatening Aragorn and Gimli. He let a throwing knife fall into his hand, turned, and threw it. Gimli gave a surprised yell as the knife flew at him, slicing through the rope holding him and the man together. The two stared dumbly as the ropes fell limply around them. Then Gimli growled and retrieved his axes. "It's about time." As he spoke, an orc lunged forward, grabbing the elf's hair in a firm grip, only to give a scream and let go, rivulets of blood dripping down its fingers. The assassin turned his knives so they were facing upward, stabbing the orc in the jaw, up to its brain. Then elf, man, and dwarf paused, all looking around the now silent clearing. Gimli scowled and glared at the assassin. "You could have left us a few." Aragorn, meanwhile, was counting the dead enemies. 19, 20, 21. You just killed 21 orcs. Legolas nodded. Yes. 21, the man stressed. I can count. By yourself. So? I've slain more. There it was again, the open confusion. Legolas was used to fighting large scores of enemies on his own. This was nothing special or amazing, right? The ranger's expression said otherwise. Aragorn sighed and shook his head, giving up. Next time, free us before you fight. We can help. The assassin smiled nervously. All right, it's just, I am not used to fighting alongside others. He paused, turning to the left, though I do believe it is time that I learn. There's another wave coming. Gimli was broken from his irritation that he had not been able to kill any orcs by his words. The dwarf looked at him incredulously. How do you? How many? Aragorn interrupted. At least 40, the assassin said calmly. I am Esgol, by the way, Master Gimli. It is a pleasure to meet you at last. Likewise, the dwarf admitted, looking into the trees eagerly as he waited for the orcs to come. You are as great of a warrior as my father claimed. You know the dwarves, and yet you did not reveal yourself to me or the elves? Aragorn demanded. Then he brushed his annoyance aside, drawing his sword. I wish we had met under different circumstances, Gimli. I am Estelle, adoptive son of Lord Elrond. Surprise flitted across Gimli's features before they returned to a determined mask. Great. How far away are the orcs, Esgol? 200 meters and closing fast, Legolas said, voice strained. He looked at his two companions, and fear settled in his heart. He had never fought alongside allies in a battle like this. The only time he had ever been close was the Battle of the Five Armies. It did not count, however, because when he had been with Thorin, Fili, and Kili, he had been forced to adapt his fighting style to that more like a warrior's. In that battle, he had consciously stayed still and with his companions, not moving away. But now his assassin mentality was burning through him like a fire in his veins, and he knew that he would be fighting like one within this battle. He would dodge and aim to kill. He would strike faster than a snake, with no concern for all around him. He had two focuses when he was in this mentality, killing and survival, which led him to a fear he did not know he had. What if he accidentally caused harm to his allies? What if, by dodging, the enemy's blade hit the man or dwarf instead? What if, instead of striking an opponent, he accidentally hit Aragorn or Gimli? Aragorn noticed his expression. He recalled the way that the elf fought and dodged, and how he said he was not used to fighting with allies at his side. Esgol, how about you cover us with that bow of yours, the man said. We'll take care of any enemies you miss. The elf felt relief wash through him like a warm wave. He would not have to fight alongside them at first. He quickly retrieved his arrows and shot up a tree, peering down at the man and dwarf. I only have 25 arrows. Gimli huffed, hefting his axe. You won't be needing all of them, elf. You've killed 21 orcs. Now I have to catch up. The elf laughed, the joyful, heart-lifting chuckle of his race. We shall see, Master Dwarf. He could see the orcs in the forest and put 4 arrows to his bow, drawing back. The weapons went soaring, each striking an orc in the head or throat. They went down, and the other orcs roared, shrieking like animals as they ran at the 3 warriors. Aragorn stabbed one in the chest, sword sweeping sideways to sever another's head from its body. Beside him, Gimli struck an orc in the knees, forcing it down before killing it with a hard downward swing of his axe. Legolas shot the orcs that tried to crowd his allies, taking out any that tried to sneak up on them. The ranger spun his sword in his hand, slicing an orc vertically up its torso, and blocked the sword of another, forcing the blade aside and slicing off its arm. A quick downward thrust ended its screaming. He turned, catching an orc across its stomach, and blocked a downward swipe, circling his blade around and plunging it into the orc's torso, right below its collarbone. A diagonal swing slashed open an orc from its shoulder to its hip. Gimli struck an orc in its lower back, another in the stomach, and a third in the chest. His axe moved with deadly precision, each slash and strike hitting its target. He turned, swinging his weapon horizontally and cutting into yet another enemy. Noting an orc 20 feet away, the dwarf unsheathed his throwing axe and tossed it. It flew through the air, circling vertically, and slammed into the orc's forehead, bringing the creature down. The orcs fell quickly to Gimli's axe, Aragorn's sword, and Legolas's arrows, and soon only 5 remained. Legolas put an arrow to his bow, sighting, and paused as 3 new presences entered his awareness. An instant later, a blaze of white light blinded the remaining orcs, their pained screams ripping through the clearing. Legolas's allies yelped in surprise at the sudden magic, but the elf was calm. He blinked rapidly, eyes adjusting, and shot the remaining orcs with practiced ease. Then he searched for the source of the light. Standing there, staff raised and a determined expression on his face, was Radagast. On his left was Glorfindel, who looked stunned by the brown wizard's display of power, and on his right was a gray-cloaked man who wore a hat similar to Radagast's. Legolas identified him instantly, Gandalf the Grey. "We could have taken them," Gimli grumbled, glaring at the wizards. Legolas ignored him, leaping from his tree and landing on the ground. He did not speak to Mithrandir for a moment, focusing on his Istar friend. "Thank you, Radagast." The brown wizard looked pleased with himself. "Glorfindel ran into us on the way here and told us what had happened. I'm afraid that's why we took so long to arrive. We aren't as fast as you are when you run through the trees." He glanced at Gandalf and walked forward, standing beside Legolas. "Gandalf, this is Esgol. He's an old friend of mine, and he's the one who convinced me to help more in the fight against the Shadow." Gandalf's eyebrows rose. "Really?" He studied the violet-eyed elf intently. "I'm guessing that you are the hidden guardian, then." Legolas glanced at Aragorn, who blushed. "The name fit, all right." "Yes, he is the guardian," Radagast informed his peer. "He is also the one who made me care about more than the animals in the forest. He helped me see that the elves within it were worth fighting for as well." Gandalf blinked and looked at Legolas with gratitude in his wise eyes. He smiled warmly at the young elf. "Well then, I must thank you, Esgol, for aiding Radagast in finding his conviction." Words could not describe how grateful the Grey Wizard was. Without Esgol, the Brown Wizard would have remained the bumbling, uninvolved Istar he had been. His eccentric personality had not changed, but there was a fire in his eyes and a new determination within him that had not existed a few hundred years ago. The elf seemed to understand the gratitude Mithrandir felt, and only smiled and nodded once in acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Gimli was walking around the battlefield, making sure their enemies were indeed dead. He paused next to the last orc the assassin had killed in the first skirmish. "Esgol, why did that one orc start bleeding when it grabbed your hair?" the auburn-haired dwarf wanted to know. Legolas smiled at him and gently picked up one of his braids by the end, unwinding it and revealing a thin, string-like piece of metal lined with spikes. He quickly rewound the braid once more, hiding the sharp metal from view. "Recently, during a battle, an orc got close enough to me to grab my hair. It was not a pleasant experience, and I had no desire to have a repeat of it, so I went to the smithy and asked him to create these spikes. They are small enough not to be noticed, but sharp enough to cut a person who tries to pull my hair and make them release me. My braids are also positioned in a way so that most of the time an enemy will grab one of them, and if I turn abruptly, the spikes won't strike me in the face." The assassin thought about all of the warrior elves he knew with long hair. If they were not wearing a helm, pulling their hair would be easy for an enemy if they got behind them. He glanced at Glorfindel, who looked distant and strained. His eyes were dark, lost in memory. Legolas winced as he guessed what exactly the Vanyar was remembering. He had never forgotten his death. A hand reached up, and the Balrog Slayer touched his long golden locks, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. "Could I get some of those?" Legolas nodded adamantly. "Yes, I will have the man who made mine make you some, Gwador." The affectionate name made Glorfindel's lips curve upward a tiny bit. Aragorn and Gandalf were confused as to why the assassin had called the Balrog Slayer brother. Gimli had no idea what the elf had just said and did not care. Radagast, however, had a big smile on his face as he watched Glorfindel give the young elf an affectionate pat on the arm before turning to the dwarf. "Where is the rest of your party?" the Vanyar questioned. Gimli shrugged. "They should be at the palace by now. We got separated." "Then we should be heading there," Gandalf said briskly. "They'll be worried about you, no doubt about it. Let us go ease their minds." They burned the orcs' bodies, smoke rising into the air, and departed, returning swiftly to the palace. None of them noticed that a single orc had escaped the massacre and was currently running far away from the battle, intent on its new mission. It was a captain, and it had found the Hidden One. It did not know whether the elf, man, or dwarf was the Hidden One, but it knew that when it had come upon the battle, it could no longer hear its master in its mind. The captain had to get away from the elves and Mirkwood and tell its master what had happened, because, even though it did not know which one the Hidden One was, it knew what the Hidden One looked like. It had to inform its master of this. Its master would know what to do. Legolas was silent as the mismatched party made their way back to the Elven King's palace. They were an interesting and strange group. 2 elves, 2 wizards, a dwarf, and a man. All they needed was a hobbit for their odd band to be complete. However, despite the company he kept, the violet-eyed elf felt dread settling in his gut. Glorfindel noticed his little brother's increasing discomfort, watching as he seemed to shrink in on himself more with each step. His face was blank, but his eyes revealed his worry. "It will be all right," the Vanyar told him quietly, too softly for the others to hear. "Will it really?" Legolas murmured back in a small voice. "I humiliated their princess. They'll hate me." "She deserved it," Glorfindel growled coolly. "She deserved a lot worse. I hope Thranduil punishes her properly. The warriors will see that. They'll shun her, not you. Her actions were rude and dishonorable, and it will take a while for the warriors to respect her again." "Then Baroneth is going to hate me," the assassin muttered. "A lot." "If she attacks you, you can kick her royal ass again," Glorfindel said vehemently. That forced a chuckle out of Legolas, and he felt much better. Again, he was reminded of how safe he felt around his big brother. It was nice to know that someone had his back so fully. The assassins stayed close to the Balrog Slayer as they entered the palace grounds. Thranduil, Aglar, Elrond, the twins, and a couple familiar dwarves, Fili and Kili, Legolas noted, were hurrying towards them, told of their arrival by the guards. "Gimli," the brothers chorused. "You're all right." "Of course I'm all right," Gimli grunted. "You're not getting rid of me that easy." "Thanks for finding him, Esgil," Kili chirped, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Thank you for finding poor little Gimli when he got lost in the woods." "I did not get lost," Gimli snapped. "Right," the brothers drawled disbelievingly. Thranduil cleared his throat, stepping forward and drawing attention to him. "Welcome to my home, Gimli, son of Gloin. I am glad you have returned from your detour safely." The dwarf studied the Elven King suspiciously for a moment, before giving him a short bow. "Thank you for welcoming me, Elven King. Now that you are no longer missing, we can begin forming the new agreement between our realms," the Sindar said, turning to the two dwarf princes. "Your friend Balin, the negotiators, and my advisors have already begun. Let us go inside." Before they could move a single step, a shout made them all halt in their tracks. "You! How dare you humiliate our princess?" A warrior was stalking towards them, an angry expression on his face. Legolas recognized the elf as one of the ones who had wanted to spar with him and had been present at Baroneth's defeat. So much for all of the warriors seeing that their princess's actions were arrogant and rude. "You impudent peasant! You filth!" the warrior snarled. "You have no honor. You used underhanded, vile tactics to defeat our princess. How dare you dishonor her, you cowardly, homeless trash!" The watchers could not believe the warrior's gall. He had insulted Esgol, in front of the Elven King of all people. Thranduil's entire visage darkened, but before he could speak, Gimli leapt forward, grabbing the warrior by the front of his shirt and forcing him down to his level. "Now listen here, you piece of orc scum," the dwarf snarled. "I've only just met Esgol, but I know for a fact that he is one of the bravest people I know. He's been fighting for and defending this realm for a while, and yet you stand there and insult him like a whining elfling. Learn some respect, or leave him alone, bastard, or I'll hit you with my axe so hard that you'll land in Mount Doom." With great strength, he shoved the stunned warrior to the ground, glaring at the elf until he staggered to his feet and fled. There was a heartbeat of shocked silence before the younger prince of Erebor spoke. "Who would have thought that Gimli, son of Gloin, would befriend an elf?" Killy teased. Gimli scowled at him. "Shut up." His embarrassment and anger melted away when he saw the smile on Legolas's face. "Thank you," the elf said in his soft, musical voice. Gimli turned red, shifting uncomfortably. "Yeah, any time." "Good," Glorfindel spoke suddenly, startling them all. "I can trust you to ward off any idiots that may try to hurt my brother then. Esgol is too nice for his own good. If someone bothers him, could you beat them up for me?" There was a glint in the elf lord's eyes that stunned the group from Rivendell, inwardly pleased Thranduil, and made the dwarves grin. "I can take care of myself, Gwador," Legolas muttered. Next to him, Aglar felt anger course through him, and heaviness settle in his gut, making it tighten. His fists clenched, and his lips pursed when he heard Esgol call the Balrog Slayer brother. He was confused by the sudden surge of jealousy that rippled through his veins, making his eyes darken. Why should it matter to him what the assassin called the Vanyar? "Of course you can," Glorfindel said, unaware of the burning glare Aglar was sending his way. "But you're still too nice. You won't hurt idiot elves that insult you. Gimli will." The Vanyar smirked darkly. "And so will I." No one doubted his words, and Thranduil did not protest about the Balrog Slayer threatening his warriors. If they hurt or insulted Esgol, they deserved it in his opinion. "Now that that is over with, let's go inside," the Elven King said calmly. The group began to file into the front door, but Aglar held back. "Esgol, may I speak with you a moment?" the silver-haired elf asked cautiously. Legolas hesitated a moment before nodding. He stopped outside the door, Glorfindel pausing as well. The assassin gave his big brother a smile. "It's all right," he murmured. The golden-haired elf lord did not move. The Vanyar pinned the silver-haired elf with a glare, an obvious message in his eyes. Hurt him, and crown prince or not, I will make you wish you had never been born. Glorfindel turned to Legolas, giving him a bright, encouraging smile, before he walked into the palace. The assassin and Aglar stood far apart, looking away from each other as a tense silence fell over them. The crown prince cleared his throat awkwardly. I wish to apologize for my sister's behavior, and my own. I judged you based on rumor and the words of others, rather than let myself see for myself who you are. I know I haven't been the most pleasant elf around you, but I would like to start over. I would like a second chance. He offered his hand. Legolas did not hesitate, taking the prince's hand and giving it a firm shake. Your suspicion can be forgiven. I am Esgal, an elf of Mirkwood that just happens to be an assassin. Aglar smiled, a tiny grin. And I am Aglar, also an elf of Mirkwood, but one who happens to be the crown prince. Legolas put on a thoughtful face, head tipping to the side. I have heard that crown princes are arrogant, aloof, prissy elves. The silver-haired chuckled. And I have heard that assassins are violent, emotionless weapons. The violet-eyed elf's purple orbs glinted. Let's prove each other wrong, shall we? And Aglar found himself smiling a full grin, one that revealed his white teeth and lit up his face. I think that we shall. And the second chance began. The orc halted, breathing heavily, and sat down hard on a rock. It was far from Mirkwood, far from the elf, man, and dwarf that had killed its kin. It closed its eyes, testing itself, and was pleased to find that its bond with its master had returned. My master, it called mentally. There was a moment of silence before the Witch King responded. Report. All of my kin are dead, the orc said. They were all killed, but I have found the hidden one, though I do not know which warrior he was. 3 warriors killed my kin, an elf, a man, and a dwarf. Then 2 wizards came. They do not matter, the Witch King interrupted. He knew it was not the wizards that blocked his sight. The elf, man, and dwarf. Describe them to me. The orc did, confusion clouding its thoughts, as it was unable to show what he had seen and what the elf, man, and dwarf had looked like. Instead, it described them in amazing detail, from their weapons to their eye color. Every fact was passed on from servant to lord, and the Witch King was easily able to identify the elf, man, and dwarf. The man was Estelle, adopted son of Elrond. The Witch King knew that no human could block his master's power, and did not care about him. The dwarf was Gimli, son of Gloin of the Erebor quest. The dwarves were stubborn, but they would not be able to block his sight either. Dwarves could not perform such magic. Then there was the elf. The elf he was able to identify the moment the orc mentioned violet eyes. The elf who he had not thought about in years. The elf who he had believed was dead, who he thought had been slain long ago, but had only been in hiding for so many years. The Witch King dismissed his servant, ordering it back to Minas Morgul, and leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. So, Legolas Thranduilion is still alive. It is amazing that he kept himself hidden for so long. Then again, it seems he is more of a threat than I once thought. You taught your apprentice well, Siren. I will give you that much. The Witch King knew that he would not be able to find Legolas, and also knew that sending an assassin after the elf would be useless. That was made obvious when the violet-eyed elf killed the 2 assassins he sent after the Elven King. And now the Witch King's fears had finally been realized. Legolas had revealed and allied himself with the elves. He is not a threat, Merely a small complication, the Nazgûl Lord thought. It does not matter that Saruman and I will be unable to spy upon the elves when he is with them. Knowing their movements and plans do not affect my master's coming. Once my master has come to Middle-earth, the elven realms will fall, along with the rest of this world. The fools will not know what has happened until it is too late. From within his prison, the darkness heard it all. An elf, a dwarf, and a man, he thought. An elf, man, and dwarf fighting side by side against the shadow. Such a grouping was unheard of, each race keeping its distance from the other. But the news of the different races allying themselves would not have bothered the darkness, if not for the fact that they were 3 warriors. Not only that, but according to the orcs, the elf used a bow and arrows, the man used a sword, and the dwarf used an axe. An elf, a man, and a dwarf. 3 warriors from 3 races that normally hated and mistrusted each other, yet had quickly become comrades in arms. 3 allies, 3 races, 3 warriors, 3 weapons. A bow with arrows, a sword, and an axe. 3 wielders, an elf, a man, and a dwarf. No, he was being paranoid and overthinking the situation. It did not matter that a dwarf, man, and elf had become fast friends. Such quick attachments were quite common among mortals, and the elf had been raised by one, so it was not that surprising. He was looking too deeply into this. He was seeing connections where they did not exist. It was just a coincidence. Each warrior had merely used the favored weapon of his race. There was nothing deeper than that. The darkness scoffed at his own behavior and feelings, annoyed with himself. There was little chance that they were the 3. It was foolish of him to think that the first elf, man, and dwarf trio he heard of could wield the weapons. That was, if the weapons even existed, and Lorien the Valor was merely trying to scare him with false prophecy. Yes, that was it. The Valor were not cold enough to make elves create the black weapons, thus sending them to their deaths, and the elves of old were not brave enough to take the steps on their own to create them. The weapons were only a story told to make him rethink his escape. The Valor knew of his power and what he would do to Arda once he got out. And he would get out. Only one more piece of the puzzle was needed for him to be free of this wretched prison. And when he did, all of Arda would tremble. When he broke free, black weapons or not even the darkness of Morgoth would be able to compare. He would destroy Middle-earth. He would raze the Undying Lands. He would decimate Valinor. He would annihilate all of Arda. And in the end, only he would remain. In the end, there would only be darkness.